All
Good morning,
right.
good afternoon, and everyone. Uh, Thank you very much for attending this second webinar on physical accessibility. We're very glad to be joined by our colleagues from the Nigeria team who will be doing the intro and the agenda. So, over to you. Please go ahead.
Right. Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are connecting from. My name is Neka from Nigeria UNCT team and the host for today's series. At today's series, let me formally welcome everyone to this UNCT Disability Inclusion for All Focal Points. Let me also specially thank colleagues who have stretched to be in this meeting, notwithstanding their time zone. So on behalf of the organizers, I appreciate your support. And as Brian mentioned at our last meeting, it is quite challenging to meet demands. So they are working to know what's possible, but really it is exciting to know that colleagues are prioritizing this meeting. And I want to say a big thanks to everyone and welcome again. Yes, today, as I have mentioned, and without taking so much time, it is all about physical accessibility, setting up an inclusive office environment for persons with disability. The webinar hopes to cover how to create a more accessible and inclusive office environment, the level of physical accessibility, aspect of physical accessibility, and others. Remember, it is an interactive training section and workshop, and therefore, we expect colleagues to be active during interactive sessions, to share your experiences, ideas, challenges, and even questions on how to proceed. And I'm sure you will get adequate responses. As usual, during this time, colleagues are expected to raise their electronic hands and you'll be called to make your intervention. The chat box is also there for you if you prefer to use that. And of course, let's be mindful of the limited time we have to enable us conclude appropriately. So as the host, I want to welcome you again to the series. As always, today's series promises to be informative, and at the end, I hope that maximum learning experience would be achieved with our capacities on this segment expanded and extended. Um, Moving to the next on the agenda, it will be, please, can we see the updated agenda? All right. Moving to the next agenda, without taking much of our time, is on the high impact services, tips for conducting accessibility assessments, intro, basics and physical accessibility definitions, UN instruments addressing physical accessibility, international standard and guidance for physical accessibility, interactive sessions, of course, the challenges and opportunities, then discussions, example of physical accessibilities, implementations in Nigeria, where Nigerian team will be presenting on their own implementation, the lessons learned, achievements and challenges. Then we have questions and answers, whereby we expect colleagues to be involved in this particular item, the questions and answers. As usual, it's supposed to be an organized one, and of course, videos, then resources, then we conclude. Thank you so much for having me. And on that note, please let me give the floor to the BOS team for the next item on the agenda. Thank you and welcome again. Over.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'll just take a minute or so to speak about the high impact services within the business operation strategy, which is where all these disability inclusive services fall under. Just so that you know that there are other ways that through operations you can also drive the 2030 agenda and drive impact. So traditionally we see operations supporting the programmatic side and trying to be as efficient and high quality as possible, but we're also seeing different ways that you can drive impact and also kind of link the programmatic side in the sense that we're going to be walking the talk, right? If we have in the case of disability inclusion or sustainable premises, we can really drive that impact within us, and that can, in effect, have an impact in other organizations, right? We've heard of some premises that become accessible, and then they have either governments or private sector approach them and kind of replicate a lot of the things that are being done. So we see that the impact not only stays with us, but it can also be replicated and complement a lot of the other initiatives. These are some of the main areas of high impact, just so that you keep in mind, especially with that BOSS annual review coming up in January. There's the more straightforward ones, which are the cost efficient services, which are about 10 or 15 of those services. And you can see it very clearly on your BOSS dashboard, which ones those are, which ones are applicable or not to your premise. But really good to, instead of just simply kind of reviewing the annual review with the services that are there, that you can kind of explore implementing some of these services. They're also tagged as highly recommended in the BOSS platform, so that's another easy way that you can see it. A lot of these services also have a quality improvement, as you've seen, and this is something that we're working more to collect the data so that we can, from 131 countries, sort of orient or suggest which ones are the ones that are seeing the greatest gains in quality. We then have some good practices, which I think if you've been in some of the other webinars, they include WFP and UNHCR's fleet management solutions. So being able to book and manage fleets through an app, very similar to some other rideshare apps that are in the private sector, but specifically for the UN. There's, as another example, the global assets disposal from UNHCR. So being able to have auctions jointly to be able to dispose of different assets. We then have environmental sustainability. So we're working also with UNDP, who are specialists in implementing different solar solutions, renewable energy, and energy efficiency, working with UNEP there as well. And the idea is to be able to replicate the specialties that are in the system that are sometimes happening just within each entity, to be able to be accessible to all country teams, all country teams and all entities within the country team. The other two is gender inclusion. So we've done gender responsive procurement. We have a couple of those webinars coming next week. And we're also working to do gender parity strategies from UN Women and PSEA, which is the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment. And then, of course, the topics that we're covering today with disability inclusion focused on these three main areas. So inclusive HR is one of them, accessible ICT and digital accessibility, and physical accessibility. And Heba, who is in our team in DCO, is working to kind of give as much training and support to the different UNCTs on this, both in disability inclusion and in environmental sustainability. We're offering seed funding to be able to implement a lot of these initiatives. So with disability inclusion, we started with 16 countries, and we're going to be scaling to 40 countries. So if you are interested also in being part of this seed funding initiative, reach out to us, and we can put you on the list for when it does happen. In environmental sustainability, also, if you'd like to have a business case done of your premise about the feasibility, ROI, and investment needed to implement a solar solution, reach out to us, and we can also support with that. So this is just the bigger umbrella that goes on top of this webinar. And for you to stay tuned, and for you to reach out also if you want support or you'd like to see how to make your business operations strategy more impactful and linked with the SDGs. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it over to Heba, who will take on the main content of the webinar for today. Over to you, Heba.
Thank you very much, Luis, for the excellent overview about the high impact services. Now, I will give you a little bit of an introduction about myself, and then we will go from that to the discuss physical accessibility. So, my name is Heba Khalid. I am based in Alexandria, Egypt. I have a master's degree from the University of Birmingham in inclusive education in developing countries. I have a 20 years experience in the field of digital accessibility, website assessments. I offered consultations and guidance to a number of NGOs nationally and internationally. such as the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, which is a library in Alexandria, where I used to give training to the young people on the use of assistive technology, and give also consultants and guidance to organizations that are starting to use assistive technology. I worked for the German Development International Agency, which is the GIZ, on disability inclusion, and I worked in the FAO RNE and the FAO HQ to do a website assessment of their website and digital tools. And currently, I'm supporting the DCO in disability inclusion. So without further ado, we go to the slide about the introduction. First of all, as you all know, there are 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide. And pardon? Yes? Did I skip something?
No, we have the workshop expectations. If you'd like
Oh,
to also
sorry,
collect that
sorry.
now or later.
Yes, sorry. Yes. So before going into that, thank you very much. I would like to know more about your workshop or your expectations or expected learning outcomes from this workshop. So if you'd like to write that in the chat, please feel free to do so. What are you expected to learn from this workshop?
And this is really to make the workshop flexible. If there's something that we're not addressing within the agenda that we can address or that we can follow up with as well, feel free to let us know either on the chat or raising your hand.
Yes.
And if not, you can do so as well throughout the webinar. So we don't have any comments yet.
Okay. So should we go to the first one, to the first slide?
Sure. And colleagues, feel free to, at any moment, just to write in the chat any question that comes up or anything that you'd like to see addressed.
So the first slide, okay. So the first slide is about tips for physical accessibility assessment. I hope I'm correct. So my assistive technology sometimes fails me. I hope today it doesn't. So the first tip about when we are trying to conduct a physical accessibility assessment is to find out more about the building we're going to assess, like the location of the building, the surroundings of the building, the public transportations that persons can access in order to be dropped off in front of the building. This is all very important. And also there are some things that we need to know that might exist in some countries. Like for instance, in Egypt, for instance, in front of building, you might find is that the streets are occupied either by street vendors or by shops that are, trying to sell their goods. So they are making an outside booths for selling things. All these might present a hazard for persons with disabilities to enter the building. So be sure to also observe your surroundings, not just the building itself, but the area around it. The second thing is to research and identify relevant regulations for compliance, meaning that you have to take into consideration the international and the national regulations and laws that you have to comply with concerning providing physical accessibility, both in the country you're residing in or you're operating in and internationally. The third thing is that you have to involve local engineers, architectures, and urban planners, because these are the ones who are going to help you do the assessment and also help you implement the recommendation. Number 4, you have to create an accessibility task force or a task team and assign each team member, divide your task into small, doable items, and always assign each team member a task in order to be easy for them to follow. The fifth thing is to plan the visit with the other involved stakeholders or parties, like organizations of persons with disabilities and persons with disabilities themselves. And be sure to have one representative of more than one representative for each disability, because as you may know, persons with disabilities are not homogeneous group. They vary, and their disabilities, they experience the disabilities differently. So two persons might have the same disability, but they have different levels of functionality. So be sure to invite persons from representatives, more than one representative for the same disability, and also covering more than one age group, covering both genders or all genders. Make sure to have as diverse group as you can. The sixth factor is revise and update existing assessment tools. If you used to rely on an assessment tool from an entity or an agency, be sure that there are no updated version of the same tool. You have to gather any needed materials or equipments in order to do your assessment and to start your implementation. So that's some tips for conducting a physical accessibility assessment. Now, as for the introduction, as I was saying, there are one
Hello.
person's. Yes,
Sorry, if I may, there were some comments that came in that I just wanted to read out to you, just so you keep in
sure,
mind
sure.
both of the expected outcomes for the training, as well as just comments about what you were mentioning. So Ayo is saying to learn more about inclusive environment for persons living with disabilities. Then Claudia is saying options to provide better office access and options for persons with disabilities or staff with disabilities. Mateo is saying tips and lessons learned since we are in the middle of conducting a physical accessibility assessment. And Tant is saying very new objective for us and interesting for all steps, initiation and implementation. And Shova is saying, thanks, Heba, key areas of UN standard office premises. Um, Heather is saying best practices in other agencies and how to identify candidates with disabilities for recruitment, like outreach and to different entities, how to adapt terms of reference to include disability considerations, and how do we manage the physical security of disabled staff members, especially in e-duty stations, which is a question that we received, if you remember, seeing how to keep whether it's bulletproof doors, making those accessible and things in the last webinar as well. And then Heather again is asking training needs for the accessibility task team. So who does this, referring to the task team, and is it an ongoing or is it initial meeting enough? Should it be composed of a specific people like security, HR, communications, etc.? Or can it be anyone? And is it recommended that everyone in the office receive disability awareness, sensitivity training? Um, our office did an assessment and we got a very bad evaluation. What are the best practices in terms of first steps? And then, and sorry, I'm reading everything in colleagues just for your reference. I'm reading it for Heva because she's a person with a visual impairment. This is the best way for us to kind of keep up to date about what's going on in the chat box, and she can kind of answer and address it. So Shova is saying, will you be available for remote assessments, remote walk-in assessments? So a lot of comments. Let me know if you want to address any specifically now, or I can also make a summary and we can address them later as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Louis, for sharing that and for reading for me. The only thing I can address now is that is about the accessibility task force. Of course, any person can join from your team, but basically, it's very important to have HR personnel, security personnel, personnel who works in the or have an engineering or architect background, and this task force might be formed just to do the assessment, and then after that you can do some regular assessments afterwards. So let's say, for instance, because as or as always, the field of disability inclusion and the science and of disability is always evolving, and new things come out every day. So what is the best practice now might not be the best practice like 1 year later. So be sure to just redo the assessment every now and then, regularly do periodical review of the assessment. And if you think that you need to form another task force to do another assessment and do another implementation for any gaps you might have identified, you can, of course, you can feel free to do so. In some organizations, they have a permanent accessibility task force, and these task force, it doesn't only work in physical accessibility, but it can they work sometimes in communication accessibility or accessible communication, in raising awareness about disability among the staff. So if you want this task force to be a permanent setup, you can, of course, you can do that and hold periodic events and other raising awareness events for the staff in your country. That would be really great. I hope that answered your question. Please let me know if.
Yeah, I think most of them, and I think most of them you're going to be addressing within the presentation as well. So if we don't, let us know at the end. To show us comment if we do, or if Heba does remote sort of virtual walk-ins of the premises. She does. And I'm answering for you, Heba, but feel free to add. We're focusing on the 16 UNCTs from now until December. But let us know what premise you're in, and if you would like us to also support you with a virtual walkthrough or a review of the physical assessment and help you to prioritize as well. So we'll give some list of support that we're kind of available to give to your UNCT.
Thank you, Liz. All right, for the introduction now, as I was saying that most of the persons with disabilities, 80 to 90% of persons with disabilities population are unfortunately unemployed. And one of the reasons of the unemployability of persons with disabilities is the lack of physical accessibility. So that's why we are addressing it now. So how is disability formed, or what is the definition of disability? Disability is the result of the interaction between physical, sensory, mental impairments and the existing barriers in the environment. And of course, physical barriers are one of the biggest barriers as well. So physical accessibility is defined as a provision of buildings or parts of buildings for people regardless of their disability, age, or gender, to be able to approach. They have to be able to enter the building, use it, and egress or exit the building, especially in the case of an emergency evacuation. And they have to be able to do that independently and in an equitable and dignified manner. I remember a situation where I have seen that a person who is using a wheelchair is trying to enter or exit from a building which is inaccessible, and another person would come to assist and carry this person with the wheelchair in order to help them out of the building. Of course, this is very well intentioned, but of course, it's completely indignifying the to the person who is experiencing it. So we have to provide persons with disabilities the opportunity to interact and use the building with the most dignified manner. The United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD, define universal design as the design of a product or an environment to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible, without the need for without the need for adaptations or specialized design. So when you're designing a building, you make the main entrance accessible without having to add another entrance for persons with disabilities later on. And when you're designing a building, be sure to provide ramps, for instance, so that you don't have to add another ramp later. So the universal design the concept then of accessibility is addressed in the different UN instruments, and among which is the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy, and it includes accessibility in a specific indicator, which is indicator number 6. And the accessibility continuum, this concept is the CRPD is describing the experience of children, adults with disabilities, and elder persons with or without disabilities departing from their homes, using pathways, using public transportations, and reaching and entering and using services and facilities on an equitable basis with other persons without disabilities. Um, as for the CRPD, it addresses accessibility in Article 9, and the CRPD sets the policies for a partner for public state parties. Sorry, for state parties and private entities to provide laws and regulations for persons with disabilities to be able to access and use public and private facilities, and also to secure reasonable accommodation for them. And this slide shows the CRPD's definition of accessibility, as you can see. And we will share the presentation later on for persons who will need that. So the most important thing is to be able to eliminate and move barriers and secure reasonable accommodations. And if we go to the next slide, it shows that the different publications devised and compiled by the different UN entities that addresses physical accessibility, and I do really urge you to have a read through them, especially the UNICEF technical cards, physical accessibility technical cards, the guidelines that they have created, and they have created the guidelines to be used in schools, for instance, in health facilities. And also the ILO have created some guidelines and toolkits to be used in workplaces or to make workplaces accessible. So I really urge you to have a read through that. As for the international standards for assessing or for physical accessibility, we have the international standards for accessible construction. It's called ISO 21542 2011, and you can request an electronic copy from the website. There are 7 principles of the universal design. And these principles are, first one is equitable use. Equitable use meaning that the building can be used by everyone, as we said, regardless of their disability, without any additional alterations. Flexibility in use, meaning that the same building can be used by wheelchairs or by users who are using wheelchairs or crouches or walking frames or any kind of assistive and adaptive device. It should also be simple and intuitive to use, meaning that it doesn't have to be so complex. One very important setback of the assistive technology, I know that we are addressing physical accessibility, but this same concept applies. One setback for using assistive technology is that assistive technology is very, very complex. They require a lot of learning to do for persons who are using them, for example, such as screen readers. So, for example, if you're using a building and the main entrance is not accessible, and the person or the wheelchair user has to go all the way to the back of the building and try to figure out where the accessible entrance is going to be, to create a barrier for them. Also, the perceivable information, signage that alerts passengers and drivers and persons with disabilities to the main entrance and to the different sections of the building has to be provided in alternative formats, like in Braille, in high contrast colors, in larger print. And it has to be using, as very important, it has to use simple language for users with cognitive impairments to be able to understand, or to users with low levels of literacy, or users that the language that the signage is written in is not their native language. The 5th principle is the error tolerance of accidental actions, meaning that if I did something by mistake, I would have the chance to undo this action and correct it. The sixth principle is the low physical effort, and this is very, very important for people who have low or weak muscle tone, or people with limited dexterity functionality. Doors, as we say, doors have to be opened and maneuvered, opened and closed with the least force possible. And that's why automatic doors are really, really recommended. Size and space. Size and space, if seated or standing, meaning that the building has to be designed in that all the facilities inside the building would have a space around them, and their size would enable users who are sitting on wheelchairs or standing to be able to use them independently and efficiently. Now, the next slide, we have a video about why physical accessibility matters. I'm not sure that we will have time to show it, but I really urge you to see it. We will include it in the resource slide at the end. And this video addresses that everyone, not just persons with disabilities, everyone needs or requires physical accessibility. And as you
Arba,
can see in, yes.
sorry to interrupt. I'm being told that the slide isn't moving. Is everybody seeing the kind of a green screen that says why accessibility matters with one woman on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Not sure, Ayo, why it's not working, or Tant as well. It seems to be working for several colleagues. Over to you, Heba. Sorry for the interruption.
No, no worries. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about who are the target groups that are that will benefit from universal design or achieving physical accessibility to buildings. Children and adults and elder persons with or without disabilities, pregnant women, people who are parents with children or who are using baby strollers, people carrying large, heavy equipments or suitcases or delivery boxes. Um, all those categories of people will make use of a ramp, for instance, to enter into the main entrance. All these users will make good use of an electronic door that doesn't require them to do any action to open it. So physical accessibility is not just for persons with disabilities, but actually for everyone. So in the next slide, we are going to talk about 4 common areas of the barriers commonly arise for persons with disabilities. And these common areas are, first, to reach the building, a movement in the outdoor environment that leads to the building and reaching the main entrance of the building. The second is to enter and exit and evacuate buildings independently. That's where users should be able to do it independently, and this is where barriers usually arise. The third is to circulate movement, which means that movement within the buildings with its different sections should sometimes have barriers. And the fourth barrier is the use of the individual rooms and facilities inside the building. So if we look at the first one, to reach moving in the outdoor uh, environment and outside the buildings, we can see that pedestrian routes leading to the environment has to be designed. The environment has to be designed to guarantee easy movement. So, for instance, as I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, you have to look at the surrounding environment and to make sure that other businesses or other premises do not create barriers for persons who will be using your premise, and to make sure to collaborate with them to free the outdoor and surrounding area out of any clutters. As for the second thing is the second principle, which is entering, exiting, and evacuating buildings. The entrance, this entrance this includes, of course, the entrance, the fire exits. They all should be easy to find and easy to use by any person with disabilities, irrespective of their impairment, especially during emergency evacuation. So they should be easy to find and easy to maneuver and easy to use. As for moving and circulate inside the building, there should be enough signage and enough directional cues to follow. So and the corridors and the hallways inside the building should be well dimensioned, well lit, and easy to use, even during an emergency where there are large crowd of people moving all at the same time. The use of individual rooms and facilities should also be they have also to be well dimensioned, and they should allow for sufficient space for wheelchair users to turn and move around. Not only users with wheelchairs, but also persons using crouches, or person relying on an assistant, or person using a service animals. So, so as we said, all fixtures and text should be appropriately designed to 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 present an accessible environment. And the next lines you can see some examples of these good best practices, as some of the people were wondering about what are the best practices. For example, good lighting. Good lighting, meaning either artificial light or natural light, and we will be speaking about this later. Appropriate acoustics, and this is very, very important. If there is an extra echo in the room, persons with hearing impairment and persons with visual impairment might not be able to move if the room has too much echo. Now, the next slide shows a very important a concept, which is the physical accessibility levels that is created by the UNICEF. And these levels, they are three levels: level A, which is moderate accessibility; level AA, which is good accessibility; and level triple A, which is high accessibility. Usually, when we have an evaluation or an assessment toolkit with three levels, and we reach the moderate level, we might think, oh, we are okay. We reached the moderate level. We don't need to do anything more. But usually, or usually we want to aim higher. We want to aim high to reach the optimum level of accessibility. So we have to reach the highest level of accessibility. And in this table, you can see the areas in which the toolkits addresses in order to achieve this high level of accessibility. And we will speaking about all these different sections in the next few minutes. So the first thing is the accessible parking, and the parking place. The first thing we have to consider is the drop off. The the drop off point will be used not only by wheelchair users and persons who are using crouches, but also by persons with visual impairment who are coming from public or private transportation. They might be using service animals. So we have to make a right of way clear between the drop-off point and the main entrance. So here you have the dimension in the length that has to be free, and the minimum width also is provided here to be able to enable the user who is using a wheelchair to move from the car and get out of the car and use his or her wheelchair in order to enter the building. Um, that is clear from the dimensions that are described here in this line about the car parks. there has to be a space should be provided less than 50 meters from the main entrance. The lesser space between the drop-off area and the main entrance, the better, so that a person with a disability wouldn't have difficulty in reaching the main entrance. And the space has to be wide enough for the car doors to be fully opened, and for the person, allowing the person to move from the car to the wheelchair or to the adaptive or any adaptive device he or she is using. So here you can see the dimensions and are written in this slide for the width and the length of the car park. And then we will move to the next slide. Do we have any questions before moving to the next slide that speaks about the main entrance? Okay. Okay, a very important thing before moving to the next slide, there has to be a signage available to direct the users to the main entrance. And this signage, first of all, there has to be a signage in approaching the car park place, symboling the international symbol of accessibility, so that drivers would identify the parking place, the accessible parking spot. And then there has to be a signage from the building, that direct users to the main entrance of the building, clear enough to be identified by drivers or passengers to be able to enter, to find the main entrance, or also by persons with disabilities themselves. So what are the characteristics of the good signage? The good signage has to provide high color contrast, has to be large enough for everyone to be able to read, and has to use easy language. And also, if possible, the signage can have a tactile raised line texture beside it, and also have a braille label to label it.
Just a quick question. Which slide would you like me to project at the moment?
Oh, okay. I seem to skip something. I'm now after I finished the accessible parking.
Right, we
Would you like?
finished that, and then I skipped a bit through the ramps and outer facilities. We kind of didn't cover, but then I'm at the entrance door and handles, and then there's indoor facilities and the different qualities of indoor facilities.
Yes. Okay. So first, before can we? I'm so sorry about this. Can we go back to just to the ramp, because I want to cover
Sure.
that.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, as for the ramp, you can see in the picture, you can see the dimensions of the length and the width of the ramp, and that there has to be a grab bar or a handrail provided, also for persons with disabilities to be able to use the ramp. But very important point is that this ramp shouldn't be slippery, should be slip resistant, and should be able to be should be usable by persons with disabilities, because some ramps might have uneven surfaces that could cause tripping to the person who is using a wheelchair. So we have to make sure that these ramps are their surfaces are smooth, but at the same time their surfaces are slip resistant. Also, they have to be covered or protected from the different weather elements. For example, the rain, because the rain can make the floor slippery, and this can cause injuries and accidents to persons with disabilities. Also, they have to be protected from the sun, because some persons with low vision cannot really operate or function very well in the very hard and strong sunlight. So it's always preferable to make it to protect it from the sun. Also, when you consider some material to be used in the handrail, be sure to use a material that wouldn't really be very cold to the touch, because some persons, especially with invisible disabilities, some persons on the autism spectrum have some sensory stimulation issues that would make it very hard for them to touch a very cold surface or a very hot surface. So be sure to use the material which is not very cold and not very hot to the touch. Now, can we move to the slide about the main entrance and doors?
Sure.
Thank you. So as for the main entrance, as we said in the beginning, automatic doors and electrically operated doors are the best because they require no force whatsoever from the users in order to operate them. And you can see there is specifications for the door width that should allow wheelchair users to be able to enter. And you have to make sure that if this door has automatic sensors, opening or closing sensors, you have to make sure that these sensors are working correctly and the time interval between the door to be opened and closed is sufficient enough for a person who is using a wheelchair to be able to pass through. Also, the door handles. If the door has a round door handle that requires a little bit of a force to move, this might be difficult for users with insufficient fine motor skills to do that, or little weak muscle tone, or weak dexterity. So always be sure that even if the door has a handle, that that users will be able to operate it using one hand. It will be also very good to install an intercom system beside the door, beside the main entrance, especially if the UN premise is part of a bigger is located in a bigger facility where you have a lot of other premises in the same location, so that if there's a person with visual impairment, he or she is able to ring for assistance if there is any if needed. So now, if we go to the accessible indoor areas or accessible indoor facility, the first thing we encounter is the reception counter desks and the reception and the security gates. So the security gate, for instance, is one of the biggest physical barriers that could prevent users who are using wheelchair from entering the building, because sometimes the security gate is very narrow, doesn't allow a wheelchair to pass through. So be sure to have sufficient space around these gates for a person to be who is using a wheelchair to not only to pass through but to turn around if need be. And I have an experience when I was trying to enter a building. This building has a couple of steps or stairs after the main entrance door. And in the middle, they were like 5 or 6 stairs. And in the middle of those stairs, you would find the security gate installed on the steps. So you can imagine how hard and how difficult this is, not only for a person who is using wheelchair, because this person who is using a wheelchair will never going to be able to uh, come through this security gate because it's placed on the steps, and also a person who is using a white cane, um, coming up those steps and finally finding the security gate. First of all, they can bump into the security gate, which can create injuries. Second, they will have to mount the stairs and at the same time take care that they have to pass through between the security gate, which is a really difficult thing to do. Do we have any question?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So the first thing that persons with disabilities see after coming through the security gate is the reception staff. So the reception staff, they should be able to interact and greet persons with disabilities and persons without disabilities. So avoid having a very high counter desks with very high bars, and avoid having a reception desk in the shape of a window that is very high to reach, because this wouldn't enable persons who are using wheelchairs to interact with the reception staff. Receptions desk themselves should be able to use by people standing or sitting in wheelchairs. Um, and other reception furniture should be positioned to allow space for maneuver and to be accessible for persons on wheelchairs. Now we move to the next slide, which is about accessible doorways and corridors. Um, Doorways and corridors are the main horizontal circulation space or space that is used for moving and circulating through the building. And they should be designed in a way that they are accessible to everyone. So they have to have the same level on each floor without any steps in between, in order to ensure that persons with disability and all the buildings is accessible by everyone. Um, so if there are any differences in the level in a building or in the floor, uh, if it can't be avoided, be sure to use the elevators or escalators, or sometimes in Egypt we use something called like a lift. It's a lift that it's not an elevator. It doesn't have a cabin or anything. Have safety bars that are secured. Person with using a wheelchair is usually step on them, and they are electrically operated, enabling the person to be able to move up or down. Um, okay, so we move to the accessible elevators, right?
Correct. And just to keep in mind, we're about an hour in. So in about 5 minutes or so, we had planned to give the floor
Okay.
to the Nigerian colleagues.
Yes, I'll be very quick. Okay, the elevators, we have to consider the location of the elevators. They have to be located conveniently in the building so that users would be able to reach them and find them. Their dimensions have to be sufficient for a wheelchair to be not only to pass through them, but to be able to maneuver and turn around inside. And their controls has to be can be accessed by everyone using audio and visual cues, a high contrast signage, large buttons, in order for the persons to be able to access them. Also remember that the floors of the elevator should be slip resistant as well. And the same goes for stairs and escalators. The important thing is to keep in mind is for any section of the building is to be well dimensioned and well lit. So the stairs and escalators have to be well lit for anyone to be able to use them. And also landing between stairs should be sufficient for a swing door to be opened, fully opened for a person for a and for a person who is using a wheelchair to use them. So we move to the other slide. Next slide. Um, I'm just a little bit concerned about the time, so I'm trying to skip a little bit of the slides that you can read at your own pace. So if we talk about offices and common areas inside the buildings, and by offices we will mean workstations, cafeterias, kitchenettes, any kind of a room inside the building, whether it's an office or whether it's another facility. First of all, the door has to be in high color contrast. There has to be a high color contrast between the door and the surrounding area. There should be high color contrast, large font, raised line texture signage, and also braille signage to indicate the different parts of the building. And also the floor of every part of the building should be non-reflective surface. They shouldn't reflect the light, and also they should be slip resistant. If it's hard and firm enough for persons on wheelchair to be able to use them. If you're using carpeted floors, be sure that the carpet wouldn't cause tripping or falling for wheelchair users. Um, be sure to for your rooms also to have a mechanism to control the natural light coming into the room by using blinds over the windows. And make sure that your switches, light switches and controls operate the same way. So for instance, if you want to turn on the light, you will press your switch upwards. So all switches in all the parts of different parts of the building would be pressed upwards in order to turn on the light. Be sure to not to avoid using fluorescent lights, because users with sensory disorders might the fluorescent light might trigger some seizure reactions for those persons, for persons, I mean for persons with sensory disorders. A very important thing is always to make sure to not to move commonly used items from and keep them in a designated fixed place so that they could be used by everyone. Whether it's in offices, whether it's in kitchenettes and or in cafeterias, always keep a commonly used item in their fixed place. And make sure to label all appliances, vending machines, microwave ovens, stove. Make sure to label them in braille, in raised line labels, and also high color contrast labels as well. There's an ink available in the market, and this ink is used to make raised line labels. It's very cheap, and it's shaped like a pen. And you use this pen to draw any kind of pattern, and then when the ink inside the pen dries, this pattern that you draw will become raised. Be sure to consider the concept of safety when installing windows. For instance, make them not very easily to open, but at the same time make them reachable by persons on wheelchair or on or persons of small stature. And remember to keep all your offices and cafeterias and kitchenettes spacious. Make moving space between aisles, between tables, between furniture pieces. Make enough sufficient space for a wheelchair to turn and to maneuver. A very important thing to keep in mind, never leave your doors of the offices ajar. Be sure that to make the door open all the way and be in line with the wall so that it doesn't create a hazard or it doesn't create accidents to persons with visual impairments. If the door has an archway or a wall behind it and it cannot open all the way, just remove the door if you can. I think I covered most of the things I wanted to cover. Unless Diego, can you please remind me if there is an important point that I didn't cover?
I
I'm
think
worried
there's
about
many.
the time.
I think there's many slides that are very technical that we'll be sharing with everyone so that they can go through them. And just specifically on the needs of your premise, you can reach out if you need more information on each one. Like there was one on toilets, windows, light switches. I think you covered a bit of the kitchens and cafeterias as well as kitchenettes. But there are some other specifications, and we even had to reduce the text. As you can see, they're already text heavy, but we reduced it from so many specifications because it gets very technical very quickly. But it will be there as a resource depending on what you need, and we're also available to follow up if you need any more in-depth information on each one.
Yes, and the only thing I would like to mention over and over again, always consult with persons with disabilities and pick or choose representatives, more than one representative for each disability from more than one age group. more than one educational level, and more than, make them as diverse as possible in order to have a comprehensive view as possible of any modifications you're going to make in your premises.
Thank you, Heaven. I know it's a lot to cover, and we wanted to do a lot longer training, but we felt like this is sort of an introduction, and then we can reach out bilaterally if you need more information on each one. Would you like to hand over to the Nigeria team then?
Yes, please. Uh, yes. Can you please go
We,
ahead and
yeah,
give us
sure.
a... Yeah.
We may not have time. We had planned to do an interactive sort of breakout room session, but depending on time, we may just do it open with everyone. So with that, I'll hand it over to the Nigeria team. I think Ayodeji is going to be covering the part of the lessons learned from them in the field, what they have learned, and what they can share about their process and journey. Ayo, over to you.
Okay. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Ayodeji Olugbemi. I work with the Resident Coordinator's Office here in Nigeria. So for us in Nigeria, we have a technical working group on disability, and the group was able to secure a seed funding from the DCO for the sum of 30,000 USD to support the systemic implementation of and the mainstreaming of disability into our programs and operations. So we have 3 indicators that we actually looked at. We looked at the indicator 13 on capacity development for UN staff. We also look at the indicator 5, which is talking about the consultation with organizations of persons with disability. And we also look at indicator 6, accessibility of UN premises. And that is the one that we'll be talking about. For the accessibility of UN premises, we for Nigeria, what we planned was to conduct the accessibility assessment first. And for that, we developed the terms of reference. We also share it with the group in DCO. We share it with the people in for the common premises for their inputs. And then we now put up the adverts to recruit a consultant to assist us with the assessment. And for this assessment, we also plan to have persons with disability as part of the team. We already have that planned. But with what Eba said, she has given us more information that it's better not to have only one per group, but to have at least 2 per group. So that we'll put into consideration when we actually start the assessment. And from what she has told us, she has really given us an eye-opener that we have a lot to do. We can already see where the gaps are from what she presented. And we'll use this with the consultants to ensure that we actually do a thorough assessment of the building. So the adverts was placed, and we already have the responses to the adverts. So what we are currently doing now is we are doing this shortlisting of the consultants, those people that actually responded to the adverts. And based on the adverts of this shortlisting, we'll have interaction with the people that we consider that can do the work. And like I said, we are already working on the shortlisting of the consultants, and we hope that before the end of November, we should have the consultants contracted. We want to accelerate the process because we know that we are really behind schedule. So once we are able to do that, we are saying that on or before the second week of December. We should have all our inception phases, all the group set up to conduct the assessment. And we'll start in the third week of December to start the assessment. And we know that it will take a while for the assessment to be conducted and for the reports to be out. And that is why we will be asking for extension to the seed funding to end by February. So we are saying that we have the reports of the assessment by February, and these reports will be widely disseminated. The UNCT, they are also aware that we want to do this. We've intimidated them, we've presented it at the UNCT to say that we have this seed funding and these are the activities that we want to conduct. So based on these, the UNCT is aware. They are also looking at and waiting for the results of the assessment, and especially those of our colleagues that are also working in the area of the common premises. They are also interested in the report of this assessment that will enable us to make our building accessible, at least the main building that we have, because there were questions about this is the UN building. What about UN agencies in other building that is not in the main building? How do we include them in the assessment? Those are some of the things that will also factor into the assessment. So we are saying that based on this finding of our assessment, we'll be able to come up with a localized disability inclusion action plan that will also look at the accommodation of persons with disability and with the recommendation. And I'm sure that the UNCT will be willing to implement the recommendation once we are able to come up with the recommendation. Some of the things that we need to do, we already have them all on in the building. We have the accessible toilets in all the floors. So that one we already have. So all the other little things that needs to be done, we'll make sure that the ones that we can quickly implement that doesn't have much funding, I'm sure the UNCT will be able to take it up. So what were our challenges? One is that doing this, we have conflicting activities. Many of the focal persons that were nominated to be on the technical working group, they have not been very active in the technical working group because they have other conflicting activities that they are doing. So basically, it is being, these activities is being implemented more by just a few of the focal persons in the various UN entities. So, and like now for the RC office, if you know, we are working on the scorecards and all that. So we are actually also very busy. But despite that, we are making our time to ensure that these activities, we will be able to implement it. And like I've touched on the limited participation of the focal points, we are still appealing to the focal points for them to be to participate in this technical working group. So we are still appealing to them. We are taking it to the program management team so that the various entities, they will know that this is actually a call for all of us to participate and to give our best to what is required. Then we had, actually, we planned to do this assessment last month. That was our plan. But because we had some technical issues when concerning the adverts for the consultancy, we prepared the TOR, we submitted it, but along the line, it was uploaded, but the date was like the when it was uploaded, they didn't look at the date very well. So it closed without people are actually applying, just a day. So we have to extend the period for the adverts to run. And this also caused some of the delays. And even the delay in putting up the advert also was there. So we know that we are now on course. We already have the responses to the adverts, and we are moving forward to conduct the assessment. So thank you. That is where we are, and that is the point we are right now in the implementation in Nigeria. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Yoji, for sharing the experience. And we would love to hear if any of the participants have any comments or any other things they would like to share. Please feel free to raise your hand or to type in the chat, and just and we would love to hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Ayudeji and Neka. I think I can also put some of the two questions that we had for the breakout rooms in case it's something that's relevant and you'd like to share. We may not have time to do the breakout room, but just in general, if you identify any challenges or opportunities that you're facing in the next steps in the journey, and keeping in mind that it is a journey, you know, the many things that Heba covered are the, as she said, aiming high or highest standards, but each office is in their own process and taking the next steps, whether those be small or large, in that journey. So if you have any challenges that you see or opportunities, let us know. Um, and if you see anything that you require support that we could provide from our end to address those barriers and opportunities. And I see there's a comment from Ranjita saying that the UNV established a reasonable accommodation facility um, of 30,000 for the period of 21 and 22 to fund accommodation requirements for volunteers to be engaged with UNV. And they've encouraged all UN entities to allocate at least $5,000 for UN for reasonable accommodation provisions for UNVs serving with disabilities. Also mentioning that UNV has added a paragraph on RA or reasonable accommodation in the description of assignment in order to make sure that reasonable accommodation needs are addressed. And that's phenomenal because reasonable accommodation is one of the main barriers. And because disability is such a spectrum and, you know, different people need different technologies and different accommodations, it's great to have that. And it's one of the main barriers in order to include and persons with disabilities in our offices. Heba, if you want to mention anything to that before I hand over to Mateo, who has his hand raised.
Thank you very much, Liz. No, you're absolutely right. This is a very good thing to or initiative to be conducted because really for persons with disabilities to be fully included, they have to be able to perform the job at the optimum level, and for that to happen, they should have the reasonable accommodations to enable them to do their job. Over to you, Luis, and or over to Mateo. Please go ahead and share with us your experience.
Yeah,
Over to you.
hello. Yeah, thank you, Abba, for the excellent presentation, and thank you also to the colleague from Nigeria. And I totally relate. Here in Albania, I also work in the resident coordinator office, and we're leading on the implementation of the seed funding as well. And definitely, it was not easy to have the buy-in from the UN country team, but we managed to have focal points and disability inclusion allies, so we drafted the action plan, and we also have been able to have a consultant with us on board for doing the accessibility assessment of the UN house, as well as another premises that is part of one of our project. So as you may know, one of the indicator in the scorecard is on joint program. And so we are also assessing we're doing a physical accessibility assessment of these premises. So my question to EBA and colleagues is that we're going to receive a report very soon. One, we received it already. The second one will will be ready in the upcoming week. And so what we ask the consultant to do is to do the assessment, but also providing recommendations in terms of the renovation works that could be implemented in both spaces. And so for sure, considering also the limited budget that we have available, we will need to prioritize the renovation works that we will be implementing. So I wonder whether you have suggestions in terms of how we can prioritize these interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matteo. Yes, you can definitely make use of the UNICEF level of physical accessibility, or so we can follow the same approach, and we can, for instance, if you have a building, make sure that you have one entrance that is accessible by users using wheelchair. You have, for example, one meeting room that is accessible, one toilet that is accessible, one elevator that is accessible, and one workstation that can be used by persons with disabilities, meaning it has the assistive technologies and so on. So you can start, if you have a limited budget, you can start to achieve level A accessibility. And then when you have other budget available, you can, of course, work more on that and scale up to the next level. But make sure that the main sections of the building, including the emergency and evacuation, is accessible by persons with disabilities, especially the entrance and the exits, and the common areas. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Abba. And it would be great if you can be in touch bilaterally as well for the deliverables that the consultant will give us.
Yes, of course. Yes, sure, no
Thanks.
problem.
And so in Albania also, Matteo, as you said, once the assessment is done, you can share it with Heba, and as soon as she, especially offers these trainings, she'll be a bit more available to review those and be able to also suggest and help prioritize what are some of the actions that you'd like to take or suggestions that you may take. Is there any other comment, colleagues? There's a comment from Cynthia saying if we have any advisory contact in Mexico City. And I was just typing, Cynthia, we're working with the International Disability Alliance, which is a network basically of different NGOs and OPDs working on disability. And they have networks throughout the world. And I'll send the link just now so that you can reach out to them, specifically in Mexico or in Latin America, or specifically any one disability group that you're looking to work with. And if for some reason you don't get a contact or anything, let us know and we can reach out to them, put you in contact as well. Saw somebody had raised their hand, but not sure if they lowered it. But let us know.
I'm still, my name is Sabina Kanai.
Yes,
I'm
please
from
go ahead.
UNICEF Bangladesh office,
Sabina.
yes. Hi, Heba. It is really, really very useful presentation. I have a small question to you, which is, do you have a specification for a accessible workstation? In our office, we have all, most of the things that you have already mentioned in your presentation, except maybe the accessible workstation. What we have is a height adjustable or desk. But if you have something special rather than that, it would be really helpful for us to implement in our office. Over.
Thank you very much. Yes, all right. For a workstation to be accessible, there needs to be a number of specifications. First of all, the table has to be adaptable, meaning that the height of the table can be adjusted to accommodate for the type of wheelchair that the person might be using.
It is there. It
Also,
is there. Yeah, we have
yeah,
it.
Perfect. Also, it is very advisable to use the workstation that have glass compartments surrounding the workstation, especially if you have users or individuals on the autism spectrum. Because sometimes or some or any persons with sensory disorders, they love to sit in a secluded kind of place, not if your workstation is placed into a common area where there are lots of it's an open area with a lot of workstations. Also, make sure that there is enough and sufficient space between this workstation and the surrounding area for a wheelchair to move. And usually we say that it's from 120 to 180 centimeters is a good sufficient place surrounding the table so that the persons would be able to move using a wheelchair users. Also, it is very important for this table to provide a knee space, meaning that the place under the table would be insulated, meaning that a person who is using a wheelchair would be able to place or put the wheelchair inside the sides of the table. That would be, of course, more comfortable for them. Also, I'm not sure if you want me to go into the details of what devices and assistive technology you should use on the computers in this workstation. Would you like me to go into that as well?
No, yeah, you don't need to. I believe you'll share the presentation, and I really would appreciate if I could have something separately for me
Yeah, we can
to
connect
implement.
bilaterally if you
Yeah,
like, and we can
yes.
discuss that. Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I think a comment on a very similar question that we had in the other webinar was that it's going to vary the adaptive technologies and the accommodations that you'll need depending on the person and the disability, right, Heba? So you were recommending to kind of wait to see what the specific need is. But that said, there are some general things that you can do, as you said, like an adjustable desk and a couple of the other technologies that may
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
larger
And
use.
there are a number of technologies that can be can be acquired, and it can be used by a number of persons regardless of their disabilities. And we are going to discuss that when we talk more in the next upcoming webinar about not the following one, but the one after that, about creating accessible office documents. We're going to talk about assistive technologies that can be used by more than one group of persons with disabilities.
Great, thank you, Heba. I posted on the chat also a quick link. It takes about a minute to give us your feedback on the webinar, things that you'd like to see differently or things that we can improve. We read it and we put a lot of attention in it. It's the same feedback form for all the webinars, but it tells us specifically how we did in that specific topic or webinar. Heba, not sure if you want to kind of close, and we also have the following upcoming webinars as well. So I put the slide on screen about the conclusion, main takeaways, and can share the upcoming webinars as well.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you very much for everyone who attended this webinar. And the special thanks go to our colleagues in Nigeria, Ayoji and Nika, and everyone who was presenting for us today. And thank you very much for attending, and we wish to see you in the upcoming webinars. And we will be sharing the recording and the presentations shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. We look forward to seeing you. We have Inclusive HR, how to organize online career fairs and in-person career fairs as well. And then we have the two ICT topics of creating accessible documents, and the second topic being how to host accessible online meetings as well. So we look forward to seeing you. We posted also our contacts in the chat. We'll post it again when we send it to you so you can reach out if you do need other support, and we're here to be as useful as we can from our end. Thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you in the following activities.
Thank you, Luis, Heba, and other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Goodbye.